Good afternoon, or morning, or evening, or night, or whatever time you might be watching this video to ladies, gentlemen, and variations thereupon, and welcome to Harvey Media Reviews, whatever I happen to want to review at the moment, which today involves just one simple question that I want to ask all of my many viewers out there. The question is simple. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The answer is, of course, the shadow knows. No, seriously, though, he does. So some of you out there who weren't alive during the Depression, so pretty much anybody watching this video, are probably not too familiar with who the Shadow actually is. So in that case, let me give you a brief explanation for exactly who he is and what he is. You see, back in the day, again, during the Depression and World War II era, that sort of thing, we didn't have comic books. Instead, we had pulp magazines. And we didn't have TV shows, we had radio shows. So what happened was that there was a pulp magazine series published by Street and Smith Publications. It was just an anthology series of detective stories. And it became popular enough that they decided to create a radio show based on their magazine. And for the radio show, they decided to give it a special little hook that would set it apart from the other detective anthology shows. They would give it a scary announcer who called himself the Shadow. And this character would come in and say, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows." And then he would tell the little story about the detective stories. However, the Shadow character was so popular that it kind of eclipsed the popularity of the rest of the series. No one really cared about the rest of the series, they just cared about the Shadow. So Street and Smith Publications decided to create an entire series of pulp novels just based around this one character of the Shadow. Okay? So they created a pulp magazine just called the Shadow Magazine, in which they explained the Shadow was actually a crime fighter, and that he would go around sort of slinking in and out of the shadows, and fighting crime and everything like that. And they gave him this really cool, dynamic look with a black hat and a cape and a red scarf and everything. It was really awesome. And then, after they were done creating said character, they decided again, the radio is what made this character popular in the first place. We got to put this character on the radio. So they took the character from the magazine, they put him on the radio, but they changed a lot because the pulp magazines and radio shows work differently, just like comic books and TV shows work differently today. So in the magazine, the Shadow was much more of your average crime fighter. He would sneak in and out of places, he would kick people's butts, and he had guns and everything like that, and he had an actual look to him. In the radio show, you can't see anything. So they gave the Shadow the power of special hypnosis. You see, hypnosis back in the day worked a lot differently than it does today. Today, hypnosis is kind of a joke. Back then, people thought hypnosis could do almost anything. And in this case, he used hypnosis to make people believe he was invisible, to read people's minds, stuff like that. And so the entire premise of the Shadow radio show was that, and in the pulp magazines, he never had a secret identity. He was just the Shadow. Eventually, they gave him a secret identity, but he was different from the one in the show. In the show, his secret identity was the character of Lamont Cranston, wealthy young man about town. He was just essentially a rich young socialite who every once in a while would go out and make himself invisible and then taunt crooks. And the idea was that because the Shadow was invisible, but also because it was radio, you couldn't see the Shadow anyway, it put the characters on even footing. Now the Shadow is, what the Shadow is really famous for is, what sets him apart from other superheroes from back in that day, like Doc Savage or, Zorro or someone like that, is because the Shadow operated in a much more macabre universe than anybody else. When he fought criminals, they were always like really psycho, twisted people, like people who cut off dead bodies and stuck them together, or people who killed people based on nursery rhymes, or really twisted, fucked up stuff like that. It was like the original superhero for horror movie fans. Before Spectre or any of those guys came up. This was the Shadow. This was the shit. And the reason why I'm bringing up the Shadow, I'm talking so much about him, is because the Shadow, originally, when I made that list, that list of the top 10, my top 10 favorite superheroes from TV or movies, originally, instead of Zorro on that list, I was going to put the Shadow. But then I realized that because it was a TV and movies, it was a TV and movie list, that even though The Shadow has appeared in television movies before, I had not seen any of those TV or movies. I'd only seen the radio show, and or listened to the radio show, I should say. And I didn't think it was fair to you guys to just pull some sort of hipster crap where I said, well, you know, I like this guy, The Shadow, because I listen to radio shows. You've probably never heard of him. I didn't think that was fair. So I wanted to go with some choice that people would be more familiar with, and it's also something that I would have known from television and movies, like I do actually know Zorro from television and movies, as opposed to Zorro. But, as opposed to The Shadow, I should say. So The Shadow really is, though, one of my favorite superheroes, just because of the dark universe he lives in, and just how spooky he is. And also, because he's the only superhero that I can think of off the top of my head who was voiced by Orson fricking Welles. I'm serious. Orson Welles, before he got big, was doing the Shadow. And that's just fantastic. That's brilliant. So... But it got me to thinking, that list, I love The Shadow so much, and I've got all these, and there's all these movies and TV shows of The Shadow that I've never even bothered to look up, much less see. So, I really should rectify this. I should go out there and I should find out these things. And it turns out, they're all readily available on the internet, so I found all of them. And I figured that, now that my my source of Bible Man stuff is dried up for a little while, maybe I can look at the Shadow stuff, and we can talk about that for a little while. So, it's up to you if you want to keep watching at this point, if you're interested to speak or not. But hey, I'm interested in this stuff, so I'm going to look at this. So I'm going to look at the Shadow, and I hope that you guys are interested enough that you're going to look at it with me. So the first, I got my little notes here. So the first movie that we're going to look at is a film called The Shadow Strikes. Now, technically, the first film appearance of The Shadow was apparently there were, and this is going off of Wikipedia, so your mileage may vary as far as how accurate my facts are. Apparently, the first ever actual film version of The Shadow was a series of film shorts that Street and Smith Publications made in order to essentially hype up their radio show. And they just put them out, and they put snippets of their radio show with a completely black screen and some narration from The Shadow on the big screen as just a commercial for the radio show. Which I mean, it makes sense to me, but it's also a little bit weird given the modern culture that we have today and how different that is. But I looked for them. I did, and I figured I would start with the first, but I couldn't find them anywhere. So I couldn't find them on YouTube. I couldn't find them on the internet. So I couldn't. I don't know if those even exist anymore, or even if Wikipedia was completely lying to me. But after that, the first time, as far as I know, that anyone actually tried to make a actual film adaptation of The Shadow was a film called The Shadow Strikes. Now, according to the credits, this is an actual adaptation of one of The Shadow's pulp stories, but then again, at the end of every episode of the radio show, they would always say, this has been an adaptation of one of the stories in the Shadow magazine by Street and Smith Publications. And they never were. There were never, I think there were maybe 2 or 3, probably only 2, stories in the entire history of the radio show that were actually even remotely based on stories from the pulp magazines. The rest of them were all original stuff. So I think that, I'm not entirely, I've never read any of the pulp magazines, but I'm not really sure that we can really believe that this is actually based on one of the Shadow stories. It might be, for all I know, but it probably isn't, is what I'm trying to say. So, anyway, let's begin viewing The Shadow Strikes.